glad to have the opportunity this week now to speak on the report of the committee, and I want to also take this opportunity just to commend the committee for the work that they've done. I know when Taoiseach Enda Kenny proposed the process of the Citizens' Assembly and committee then of the Dáil, that some people were quite sceptical of that process. But, you know, I think if we've learned anything in this country, we've learned that all of the issues around the question of abortion are complex issues. There's a wide range of views, and there's a whole lot of different factors that come into play in relation to the issue of abortion. And for that reason, it's not something that, you know, you can just talk about off the top of your head or come to a decision on without being informed. And there are many legal and medical aspects that people need to familiarise themselves with, and that they need to tease out and to look at what they believe is the best way of addressing this problem through legislation or a referendum through the Constitution or whatever. But it does require quite a lot of teasing out and the taking of expert advice. And that was what happened with the Citizens' Assembly. And, you know, people may complain about the counties people were drawn from or whatever. In the main, was seen as a fair and objective process. There were 100 citizens drawn together who took the time, who devoted themselves to really engaging with this issue. And I think, you know, it was a very worthwhile process. And that was followed up in a very similar vein by the Committee on the 8th Amendment here in the House, or in the Houses. Again, I would commend the members of the committee, all members of the committee, for volunteering to go forward and to put the time into researching, listening, learning and all of that about the many different aspects of the abortion issue. And I think all of them, made a sincere and genuine effort to grapple with the issue, and came forward finally then, in the relatively tight timescale that was allocated to them, with a comprehensive report on the matter. And I think we should all thank the committee and be grateful to them for the efforts that they made. In terms of the approach that was taken, I had quite a similar experience in the Committee on the Future of Healthcare, where members came in from diverse kind of political positions, listened to the experts, listened to the evidence-based information that was given to them, and came to conclusions. And the same kind of approach was very much taken by the Committee on the 8th, where, you know, people engaged there, they listened to experts, they listened to how this issue is dealt with in other countries, they got legal and medical advice, and they did grapple with the topics and all of the aspects of it, and came up with what I believe is a balanced and comprehensive report. And we owe them our gratitude for having put in that work. I think there's a number of different aspects of that report now that we just need clarification on. I think one of the key ones that is emerging now at the moment is the question of the approach to be taken in terms of repeal or replace. And this is a matter of concern, I think, to a lot of us, because I think it's important that we move forward as quickly as possible and have the referendum. But it's also important that there's no kind of ambiguity or uncertainty around that. And there are conflicting messages coming across in relation to what is the best approach to take. And we know that the Citizens' Assembly, for example, got legal advice that the best approach would be to replace, to actually state in the Constitution that responsibility and power to legislate in the area of abortion would pass to the Oireachtas. And I suppose that was surprising at the time, but that was the legal advice. And then we hear that the advice given to the Committee on the 8th was a contrary advice. Now, we didn't have the benefit of being able to read or listen to that advice, because that was advice provided in private. But it was the contrary advice that, in fact, members of the committee have suggested that the overwhelming advice that they received was that putting in a new clause requiring the Oireachtas to legislate would be highly unusual and could represent actually a violation of the separation of powers. And, you know, that is a worrying aspect of this. But then we hear from government that the Attorney-General is advising that it would be better to have a provision in the Constitution. So the last thing we want is to go through a referendum and then to have, you know, Supreme Court cases taken on the result of that, and this dragging out indefinitely. So we need clarity at this point. There's conflicting legal advice, and I think we all deserve, and the public deserves, to have early clarification on that. And I would call on government to publish the Attorney-General's advice. I know it's not a general practice to publish advice from the AG, but I think it's very important in this case that that advice is published and that a decision is taken in this House with the benefit of that advice in terms of what is the most expeditious and the soundest way forward in relation to a referendum. And of course there is a precedent there, because in '83 the then Taoiseach Gareth Fitzgerald published the advice of the Attorney-General. We know that that wasn't followed at the time, and we've had endless problems because of that. But that is a precedent that was set, and I think, given that it's the same issue, and you know everybody wants to avoid legal uncertainty, that I would call on the government to make that advice available to this House. Obviously, the whole question of the 12-week limit and the availability of abortion under a doctor's direction in the first 12 weeks is something that some people have difficulty with. I think, again, if you consider the time and effort that went into this at the committee, it is quite understandable why the committee came to that conclusion. I think the vast majority of people in this country would say that in the case of rape or incest, nobody has the right to insist that a woman that suffered from either of those awful experiences should be prevented from taking whatever action she believed was right in terms of whether to terminate that pregnancy that resulted from either rape or incest. And, there's no way of legislating for that. The only way you can provide for people in that appalling situation is to have a provision whereby abortion would be available up to a certain time limit, and I think that was very much a factor in relation to the recommendations from the committee. The other thing, of course, which was a new phenomenon which a lot of people hadn't been aware of, and that is that in recent times there is very wide use of the abortion pill. So we're not talking about surgical abortion in many cases now. We're talking about a person getting a pill, ideally, on prescription from a doctor, but taking the pill at home and terminating a pregnancy in that way. Unfortunately, that isn't an option for Irish women because of the 8th Amendment. It blocks that option. I believe that in a situation that we have at the moment now, where increasing numbers of Irish women are ordering the abortion pill over the internet, that's a highly unsatisfactory and dangerous situation. And, all of those treatments should be provided under a doctor's direction. And the only way really that you can do that satisfactorily at the moment is to ensure that there is access in those first 12 weeks. The other points, just very briefly, that I would make in only a few seconds is that, of course, this has to be seen in a wider context. We need much better emphasis on the whole question of sex education and, indeed, access to contraception and emergency contraception. And, there's a crazy situation where some of our contraceptive methods have actually got VAT on them. Some of them are quite expensive for younger people, and that has to be addressed. But we also, of course, need to look at this in the context of having proper sex sex education in our schools. We're still a long way from that, where all our young people are taught about having healthy attitudes to sex and having responsible attitudes to sex. And the other thing, of course, is seeing all this in the context of a modern maternal health care system. And again, we're some way from that. For example, no scans available or recommended as part of the maternity strategy within the first trimester. So, there's a lot of different aspects to this. We have to take balance, but ultimately, I very much support the recommendations from the committee, and certainly the Social Democrats will be campaigning strongly for repeal of the 8th. Thank you.